Welcome back to Meet Bridget, a show that sheds light on the often untold teenage and young adult stories of successful women from all types of backgrounds and in all sorts of careers. This show is an extension of our confidence coaching service for young women. I'm Asha Gabriel, and I co-host this show alongside my best friend and Meet Bridget COO, Kashia Rosenberg. This is season 4 of Meet Bridget, and today we're so excited to have you meet Charlotte Holl. Charlotte Holl is the co-founder of First Growth Brands and president at Faire Wines. Faire, which is French for to throw a party, was first introduced in the US in 2015 and is distributed across major metro markets by Southern Glazer's Wine and Spirits. Faire is France's answer to making champagne quality affordable again by offering consumers the same traditional quality of $60 plus champagnes at a third of the price. Faire is produced by First Growth Brands in Limoux. Clearly, I don't speak French, but Charlotte. Oh, we're good there. France. Charlotte worked in recruiting, luxury fashion management, and sales, and more. So we're excited to dive in and really get to know Charlotte as a young woman and see how her story developed from then. So thank you, Charlotte, for joining us today. We can't wait.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Well, take us back. Where were you born? Where did you grow up?
Yeah. Okay, so I love this question because a lot of people think that I was born in France, but I wasn't. I was born in California, in Pasadena, to a French mother and a German father. And I spent my childhood, actually we grew up, the family moved to San Francisco when I was a baby. So my really early years were in the San Francisco area, but spent all of our summers and holidays in France. So it was kind of between the two growing up until I was about 12 years old. And then that's when I ended up in Canada for my teenage years. So we can take that however you like.
Yeah. Already really interesting from the start. You know, you have multicultural parents. Did you have siblings growing up or was it just you?
Yeah, so I'm actually the youngest of 4. And there's a 15-year spread between me and my oldest sister. So yes, I'm the youngest of 4. My 2 older sisters are actually half sisters. They grew up in Southern California. Brother and I are full siblings. We grew up in Northern California. And yeah, I'm the baby. I'm the baby of the family.
Love that. Do you feel like that? You know, I feel like there's always the family dynamic, sometimes stereotypes, but roles that we play where the youngest, I feel like in a lot of families, the youngest is the one that's kind of allowed to take more risks, is maybe a little more
100%.
bold and social. Do you like those were your roles?
1000%. With the youngest child stereotype is totally true in my family. I think it's a combination of my mom, by the time she'd had her 4th kid, has had a lot of experience raising children. And so there's less of this like worrying that happens. So there's a lot less, sometimes, you know, that scrape on the knee is just so not a big deal compared to the firstborn. And so you sometimes get left to figure things out a little bit more on your own and you get a little bit less. My parents are not handholders, first of all. They're European immigrants. They grew up in a totally different environment than, you know, the traditional American family. I think most people are like horrified by how strict some things were growing up for me, but that's just kind of how it was. Very loving family, but just very, you know, structured and strict upbringing. So there wasn't any hand-holding really at all, but much less so, I think, with me being the youngest and the 4th and the last one. There's no doubt that that's followed me around in life, for sure.
I mean, I have 2 little daughters right now, and I feel the difference between one and the next and how I am. And I'm like, I feel kind of bad for my firstborn. But then again, they get like this intensity of attention that the younger siblings don't. So it's all trade-offs, I guess. But okay, so your parents are French and German. How did they meet and how did they end up in California?
It's such a fun story. So my dad moved from Germany to Canada, spent his teenage years in Canada, and then ended up in California at Occidental College where he played ice hockey. And he always had a passion for all things French. He actually studied for 2 years in Paris at Sciences Politiques. That's not where he met my mom, though, but he did come back to the US with an even deeper fondness for French things. And he was working at LAX, which is where he met my mom. They were both working for Air New Zealand at the time. And that's how they met. And my mom already had 2 young babies at the time. She was 26 and my sisters were, I think, like 1 and 3 years old at the time. And that was kind of it. They got together pretty quickly. They were together for another 8 years before they got married and had my brother. And then 3 years later had me. So my mom had her first child at 21 and me at 36. So it spans a lot of different generations. I think we have a sibling in each. We have a sibling in Gen X, or maybe it's, I guess we're all Gen X and millennial now that I think about it, but we're at like the ends of each spectrum.
At ends of it. That's so amazing. I mean, having siblings with such big age gap and obviously being, half siblings for two of your siblings, how did that affect your relationships? Are you really close with your siblings or some of them and some not?
Yeah, I'm obviously the closest with my brother because we're the closest in age and we grew up in the same house 100% of the time. My older siblings were certainly around, my sisters, and they definitely babysat. I mean, my oldest was 15 when I was born. So she was a teenager, a full-blown teenager. My other sister was 12 when I was born. And so, yeah, obviously we're still in touch. Closest with my brother, and then my sisters are closest with each other. They have a 2.5-year age gap. My brother and I have a 2.5-year age gap. But I think something that's really interesting, and I'm certainly not an expert, but I think that closeness between half siblings seems to happen a bit more often when the common parent is the mom. And I'm not sure why that is, but I think that was certainly the case in our family. And yeah, my brother and I actually work together today. So to give you an idea, we're very close. I mean, obviously we all talk together every single day because we work together, but working with family you got to be close to make that work, right? So
definitely. I mean, I feel like people like warn against it. It's funny too because like Kashia, my co-host, and I are best friends and we work together, and it's like this for us. I'm like, well, there's just certain ways that can be set up that it actually is a benefit to the business, but it definitely has to like function a certain way, and there has to be certain like roles and dynamics and boundaries and not boundaries and things to make those kind of close relationships also work in a business capacity. Well, I can't wait to get into how not developed, in your business when we get to that stage. But I want to focus a little bit more about, your early childhood in California, your school years. What were you into? If you could like describe your childhood self in like 3 words, what would it be?
Crafty. Specifically, I was extremely close with my grandmother, who is also French and was a seamstress growing up, and she taught me how to sew. So I sewed my own clothes and literally like showed up to 3rd grade in my own creations. That's a whole other thing. I would say, as a second word, I had some big challenges growing up. I actually got diagnosed with severe scoliosis when I was 11. I also had a big change from an all French speaking immersion school into an English speaking school in grade 8. I was definitely a very odd kid and was bullied basically a lot in 8th grade and actually even in 6th and 7th grade. And combined with scoliosis, that was a very challenging year for me. So I definitely had some hardships. I would say, I don't know how to put it in 3 words, but I think those are like the 2 things that really marked my childhood was really a deep connection and closeness with my grandmother, and then fighting through these really, really tough things as like a preteen that I don't think I was necessarily prepared for and didn't realize the impact it would have on me a little bit later. But otherwise, I also had a very happy childhood. So.
Well, there you go. I mean, it's like things can be multiples at once, it's like you could have a very happy childhood while also having worked through bullying, but then having this support system of close relationship with a grandmother. I think especially those like female connections, obviously, if we're lucky, we have that female connection of a mother to influence us, but to have someone else that's kind of a step removed from your immediate parents, I think can be so impactful and such a gift and really shape who we are without even us realizing it when we're at that age.
Yeah.
What would you say? I mean, you mentioned some bullying and obviously like scoliosis. I think in general, like I had a close friend that was diagnosed with scoliosis while we were in school. And obviously, I was already her friend. So I didn't see anything different about her because of it. But she had to wear a brace and stuff periodically. And I could tell that she was definitely self-conscious and that maybe some other, kids that weren't as close as we were might have been cruel because of that. And then to also have the layer of going from a French immersion school out of that into a new school, did all of that kind of happen at the same time for
Yeah,
you?
yeah, it was I don't even think it probably took me a while to realize when you're a kid and you're like in the thick of it, you really don't realize it until later. Looking back on it now, 20 years ago, whoa. Like I'm kind of proud of myself for putting up with what happened that year. I think when you're hitting puberty, you're coming of age, you're going into a new school, things are already hard. The added layer for me was academically going from an entirely French speaking system into an entirely English speaking system. I was falling behind in courses. So bullying also started there from I wasn't keeping up and therefore I wasn't as smart as the other kids. I struggled with reading. That was really hard for me. I was super behind in math classes because we do things differently in the French system. So I hadn't even learned pre-algebra before 8th grade and all the other kids were just like whizzing through these things. American schools have certain standardized tests and they've been taking pre-SAT exams since they were like 7, or at least it felt like. And so it was just so behind academically. Even though I had this beautiful gift of speaking another language, which has helped me tenfold later in my life as an adult, I'm so grateful for that opportunity that my parents gave me. But I couldn't see that at 11. I just wanted to fit in and be able to keep up, and I couldn't. The second thing was coming from a very traditionally European family, especially, France and Germany are neighboring countries. That my mom grew up in a quasi-German speaking part of France. And so there's a lot of cultural ties between my parents. And so there was a very specific type of upbringing that we had when it came to table manners and chores and a certain style of discipline and a very hands-off approach at school. So my parents are not the type that want to know every tiny detail about what's going on. They actually don't want to be bothered during the day. They're busy, they're working, they've got things to do. Like when the child is at school, that is the school's responsibility. Unless my kid has sucker punched another kid, I don't want to hear about it. You discipline them as you see fit and leave me out of it. And so when we moved to the American system, this was major culture shock. The parents were incredibly involved. The teachers started to send my parents emails throughout the day, like whether good or bad. Charlotte didn't do so well on this assignment, or hey, the kids are going to the butterfly garden today. And my parents were just getting bombarded with like information overload. And it was making them so anxious because they were like, why am I now hearing about my kid? Like, is something wrong every 2 seconds? They created a lot of tension in the home. And I remember I got in trouble at school. I had done something bad and I got detention. And they called me into the dean's office. And I remember they called my dad in the middle of his workday while he was at a trading desk and like interrupted some huge meeting to tell them. And my dad just lost his mind. And he was like, why are you interrupting me with this? Like, if she gets detention, send her to detention. So it was just a totally, this like huge disconnect between how involved American parents are in the school system. And it's not a criticism, it's just different. But it caused me a lot of tension and like anxiety. And I didn't have the tools on how to deal with that when I was 11.
Right, right, when you're kinda already managing. I mean, as kids, we want to, as we, like, get into our school years, even into middle school when we're hitting puberty and stuff, in our hearts, we wanna please our parents, you know? So if your parents are having this kinda culture shock and being, like, kinda confused by your school system, it would be hard not to feel, like, kinda responsible for that as a kid. Like, "Okay, am I doing something wrong if what I'm doing at school is now, like, bothering my parents," and you
Right.
don't have control over how the American school system is working.
Right.
You're just there, so
Right.
to have to kind of be in the middle of that just discomfort and cultural differences, but not really know that it's like, this is all just kinda outside
Right.
your control, and you're just there to do your
Yeah.
best and, like, be a student and a
The other thing too that's funny is my mom went from having a lot of friends at the French school. By the way, everyone spoke 2 or 3 languages that I grew up with. Like this was very normal. Most people either had one or both parents from Europe. So my mom had a lot of friends and they were culturally similar. She had a hard time making any friends or connections as a parent at the school. And that's not something I understood when I was a kid. But now that I have friends who are moms and I hear like how hard it is to make friendships as adults and as new moms and as, moms of kids in the school system? And what if your kid really likes another kid, but you don't get along with that parent as a parent? Like, those are all kinds of things I just didn't, I didn't even think about when I was a kid. And I look back on it and how hard that must have been for my mom, even in that situation. But yeah, things eventually got better, which is why I ended up, and so did my brother, at a Canadian boarding school, because my dad had gone through the Canadian high school system and they were like, okay, the American high school system is not for us. Like, they're going to Canada. That's how that happened.
Looking at it now, the gift of being able to speak multiple languages as a young child, to have been able to culturally experience even multiple school systems as a young child, the growth that probably made in you as a young person is invaluable, and really when it comes to true intelligence, that adds a layer, a difference, something special that, you can't replicate it. It's part of your unique story, but it's so hard as kids, and kind of, I think we do have some really big strengths to our school systems here, but I have found in hearing a lot of stories from women who either thrived or didn't thrive in the school system, there's not a lot of support for when a kid is not doing well academically or socially. There's not someone necessarily, sometimes there's really great guidance counselors and stuff that step in, but there isn't always like okay, why? Like, what's behind this? Oh, this is someone that came from a French speaking school. Okay, like, let's have someone step in and affirm that child. Like, you're dealing with much bigger obstacle than most of the kids that have been in the system before have. And I think just even having someone give you that affirmation in that moment where your difficulty here is totally valid and it's for a reason, and like, you're not a bad kid,
Right. And some of it is also, whether I had come from a different system or not, I was the new kid, and I was one of only 2 new kids at the end of a middle school year. All of these kids knew each other and had really deeply forged friendships and relationships when they were babies and had all gone to school together. So you're trying to also penetrate a new circle and social group. Like, I just think the preteen years really have to be the hardest. Got to be the hardest. Maybe high school
and I
harder.
think it's across generation.
Yeah, definitely.
It's all hard, but I think that, like, it hits in a strong way for almost every preteen girl, having to go through all the, like, intricacies of the school relationships, the academic demands getting higher, but then also, like, experiencing puberty and all of this other stuff internally. Just hits like a wave wherever you are. And it's like, parents can help, but there's at that stage too, developmentally, you're hitting a place where it's like you're trying to establish some independence from your parents. So there's only so much that can be done in that relationship. So I think the value of this community, and even understanding, like, every woman goes through this at that time. It looks different for everybody, but at this stage, I have yet to hear of a woman saying, like, and then I was 13 and life was perfect and I felt so great about myself and I just through that time. Like, that story does not exist. Like, call me if you had that experience. Like, would love to hear about it. But up to this point, we have over 100 episodes that I have yet to hear that experience.
Yes.
Okay, so you have your older sisters. Did they go to French school all through
different
high school, or had they also gone through?
They went to public American high schools. Their dad is American, and so they grew up in a split household, but my brother and I did not. So that was always, an interesting dynamic, but they were so much older that I missed out on any struggles potentially that they had growing up, because they were already moved out of the house by the time I was 5 years old. So when I was 5, my oldest sister was 20. And so I do actually think that was probably challenging for them to even communicate any issues they had growing up to their really young siblings, because I don't think we could fully grasp or understand any of that. And so now that we're older and we're adults, I think my brother and I can certainly see how hard their childhood was compared to ours. It certainly had to have been difficult. You have, different cultures in 2 different households, 2 different households, period. I think that was probably very, very hard for them. I recognize it now,
Totally.
but I did not get that as a kid. Too young, didn't understand it.
So interesting. I mean, to have two, like you were both kind of going through. I'm sure it was difficult to have a split family set up. It was also difficult for you guys to have one school, switch
Mhm.
schools, have scoliosis thrown into the mix. Okay, so you had your scoliosis diagnosis.
Yeah.
Did you have to wear a brace, or how did that affect you on a day-to-day basis? Were you in pain?
So it happened so fast. So I fell right into the bucket of the most common group of individuals that get diagnosed with it, which is female predominantly right before puberty. And there's a lot of different kinds of scoliosis. Some people live with it, you get 10, 15 degrees. It's manageable. You just kind of work through the pain, physical therapy, whatever you need. And it stays at that curve. I had idiopathic progressive scoliosis, which means that the curve does not stop progressing unless you do something to stop it and correct it. And so when I first got diagnosed, I think I was diagnosed around 21 degrees of curvature in my thorax. And by the time I had surgery a year later, I was already at 55, almost 60 degrees of curvature. So it was a pretty severe scoliosis. And you become eligible for surgery when you hit 50 degrees of curvature. And so we already knew it was heading that way because I was progressing at a rate of like 2 or 3 degrees of curvature per month. And it did start to affect me physically to the point where when I was just walking, you could see really a deformity essentially. And the thing is, because it happens to women mostly during puberty or right before, you're also going through things like your body changing and developing. And you're going through
Yeah.
acne and you're going through possibly weight gain and like mood fluctuation. So now, it was like I'm the new girl with the weird French family that has this deformity in my back, starting to break out into acne, and just like all of these uncomfortable changes with my body, wanting to be, like a girly girl. It was just so much all at once. But I ended up having surgery first year of high school in grade 9 in December. So just December 2006. And it was a really intense surgery. It's actually very common. It's the only surgery right now that you can do to correct scoliosis. It's a scoliotic spinal fusion. So that was a full reconstruction of the spine, an implementation of surgical steel rods and bolts and screws through 11 vertebrae. So it was a very major surgery. And it took me about 3 months before I could return to school, I think, and then a full year of recovery until I could like be physically active again. Yeah, it was a big one.
Oh my gosh. And I mean, in the middle of all that, I mean, even having to like stay on top, but you're already struggling somewhat in
Mm.
school because of the school change. And then to have this setback of like physically, you have this whole other thing going on and having to be out of school for 3 months and catch up and stay on top of things. In that process, had you already switched to the Canadian school, or did you go after your surgery?
Yeah, I'd been at my boarding school for 3 months, started in September. By December, so I started high school with a major deformity in my back. But that experience got so much better. And that school was so much more supportive. And we all came from different backgrounds at that school. And we had a lot of international students, and it was a very merit based system. And I was actually incredibly supported. I felt by the time that I'd had that surgery, I was out of that other school system. And from that point on, when I got back to school and I was playing sports again, it was the first time I got introduced to team sports, by the way, because my parents never put me in sports growing up. And I actually think that was the missing key to my adolescence. The minute I got involved in team sports, everything changed for me for the better. And I just thrived from that point on. And it's always been a challenge with my back. It's something I've just learned to live with. And I do all the things I can to support that. But it was also the best thing that ever happened to me because it corrected a serious problem. It gave me a really good quality of life that I otherwise wouldn't have had. And so from that point on, things got a lot better. It was really that like age 9 to 12 that was really, really rough for me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I can imagine. Well, you mentioned sports. What was your
Mhm.
sport? Like, did you have a favorite
Yeah.
sport, or were you playing a lot of
Oh,
different
yeah.
things? What's your sport?
I two favorite sports, tennis and volleyball. I actually did flying trapeze for a couple of years before I went to boarding school. So that was my other sport. But yeah, tennis and
Oh
volleyball,
my
and
gosh.
I still play beach volleyball to this day, kind of for fun. Beach volleyball and weight training, and tennis whenever I can. So still a very active human, and very grateful for the team sports. Otherwise, I don't think I would be today.
Totally. I mean, even those are very like physically demanding sports that require a lot of back extension
Oh,
and strength and flexibility. So for you to be able to, move beyond, after your surgery and really like take advantage of, I hear the gratitude that you have for having had that surgery and moving beyond it and the ability to be comfortable and move, with a non-scoliotic back,
yeah. Oh, yeah.
is really brave and bold, to be able to like, not only am I going to have the surgery, but I'm really going to like use a back that's comfortable and works well in like sports that you enjoy.
And I think it's so important too to just like stay as active as possible when you have had these major surgeries. Cause I think being sedentary will be like the end of your mobility. And it's crazy to say this as a 31-year-old that I've been thinking about like mobility and back support since I was 13. But that has been something you hear out of like, 60-year-olds that are losing cartilage around their joints and things like that.
Totally.
And and things like just, basic health and weight management and things like that have always been a part of my life. And when I go through the ups and downs of things, I can always tell. It's so funny. I can always tell by how much my back is hurting is like the first indicator of, oh, my health is slipping and I need to reset and get everything back in alignment. And I can't let this get worse from where it is today. So keeps me in check. Like you said, I'm super, super grateful I had the opportunity to have the surgery. The surgery is not available in a lot of countries. So a lot of people come here to have this type of surgery done. And we are certainly the expert in this type. So definitely grateful for having had it because my life would look a lot different today if I hadn't.
Now, you mentioned that like age 9 to 12 stage before your surgery, before you moved to boarding school, it being just the hardest. During that time, did you have a close friend or was it your grandma or like what was the thing that kind of, if you could pin it to one or a couple things that just got you through that time to the other side, what would they be?
Oh, so from the age of 9, my brother also went to boarding school, which means he left the home. I was now the only kid at home with my parents during the years where I changed to a boarding school. There was no one left. We also didn't have any children our age on our block. Everybody in our neighborhood was like 65 years old and up. And we did not go to school with any of the kids in the neighborhood. So I had no neighbors to play with. Because my parents are very traditional and because my father was actually one of the first to work from home and he started his own business, I wasn't allowed to have friends over. Not very often because we were noisy and rowdy and that was my dad's also workplace. And so it was very lonely. It was very lonely, 9 to 12. So no friends, no sibling, no neighbors. That was tough. I would say definitely my grandmother. And as corny as this sounds, we had pets, we had cats. And I feel like I got really attached to my pet cat. And I know that sounds terribly lonely, but it was. And that probably got me through it. But like I said, it was a really tough time.
Well, and I appreciate your vulnerability, like sharing that because as kids and it's like to no fault of our parents and stuff, like I think this happens at some stage for every child. It's like you go through a moment where you're just like you're changing from being like a child of your parents and they're just going to run everything for you to like, oh wow, like one day I'm going to be an adult on my own, and like my life it is lonely, for a moment in that transition, like trying to figure out like, okay, then what is my life as a teenager and beyond? Who are my friends? How do I make friends? Like, what is my surroundings, and the different obstacles that you're going to. So I appreciate you sharing that. And honestly, I don't think there's anything shameful about like, pets or grandparents.
Yeah.
Or, I mean, I think when I was kind of going through the awkward, like preteen phase, because I literally so I got my braces on.
Mm,
I think this was 8th grade. And the next day, the day after I got my braces on, so I'm like crying in pain.
yeah.
The next day, my period started. And
So
I just remember
fun.
feeling at that time, I just feel yucky.
Like
I do not
ugly. Like you
feel
feel like,
at home
yeah.
in my body. And I had these little sketchbooks, and I'm not an artist by any means, but I think in general, I am kind of like a creative dreamer type
Yep.
thinker. I'm an idea person. And I just had these little sketchbooks, and I would kind of like when I didn't necessarily have someone where I could really like divulge my feelings to, like I was close with my parents, but I definitely wasn't, we didn't have like a relationship at that time where I was just like putting my feelings into words. I was just like drawing like how I
Yeah.
felt,
Yeah.
and like, oh, there's all these weird little illustrations, and I kind of like am embarrassed by looking at them now. But I also am like, you know what? That was my outlet then. Like just
Yeah.
kind of working through those feelings of isolation and confusion. Really, a lot of it at that time is just confusion. There's always like something, some little thing, whether it's a cat or a
Yeah.
drawing or a place that
You
you
know
can
what?
go to,
I
have some space to.
I know I didn't mention, I think I mentioned it before, but yeah, arts and crafts was a huge part of my childhood. Actually, funny story, my mom would hand me her Martha Stewart Living magazines. And I don't know if you remember, but in the back of the magazines, there was always like a DIY craft. And she was like the original DIY craft provider before YouTube.
Yes.
And I would always do like every week, I would look forward to it. She would hand me the Martha Stewart magazine and I would do whatever the craft was in the back of the magazine. I remember that so clearly now that you mention it. The other thing was though, didn't even bring this up because I actually push it to the furthest depths of my memory because I truly loathed it so much. But I took piano lessons growing up and I hated it. And my parents forced me to take piano lessons. And it was very much like you finish what you start. And I'm like, you guys started it. I never wanted to start it. I
You don't want this.
I was like, I don't want this. I hated it. And they took me drag, like kicking and screaming. They should have put me in sports, but I discovered that much later. They did the best they could. Like it just wasn't, girls didn't really play sports growing up in their families. That wasn't a thing. It was piano, it was sewing, it was arts and crafts, it was those types of things. And so I would love to say that music was an outlet for me. It absolutely was not. I hated every minute of it, but I did love art class and I did love painting and sewing and crafts and things like that. My favorite gift ever growing up, my mom bought me a flower press for Christmas. And I would just pick flowers everywhere and press them and preserve them and make things out of them. Yeah, that memory comes up pretty strongly for some reason.
I love that. And I love that you mentioned the piano classes because so much of the journey of figuring out what is a right outlet for you or what is a right job for you down the road even is having the experience of trying something that clearly isn't for you. And I think that starts as early as childhood, but like sitting down and being like, I mean, it's our parents' jobs, right, to like give
Totally.
us things to try. They can't know what's going to work for us or not necessarily. But to be able to be like, yuck, like this is not what I
Yeah.
want to be doing. I think that's still so productive because
Totally.
then it's like you can check it off and try something else. But to have that kind of contrast where you're like, well, the arts and crafts and the flower pressing and stuff like that does fill me up and provide this kind of outlet
Right.
for me where the piano doesn't. And I think that that's all part of that learning process. I think that's also so interesting. I mean, the flower press situation and considering what you do with, sparkling wine, now it really is like a cultivation and preservation of something growing. I think that's
Yeah.
really an interesting little story to bring up from the beginning.
The one thing that I do have to credit my mom with, because it can sound like this is just rag, especially my parents being so like different and strict growing up. But my mom was kind of this like superwoman in the house. And she is a trained chef. She's a personal trainer today. My mom cooked every single meal for us, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, like 5-star meals. And to the point where her food was so good that we didn't ever like going out because we were just disappointed in the food we had anywhere else. And she did instill in me a huge love for cooking, which I still have today. And now that we're having this conversation, I think about like what did kind of get me through those few years. My mom would let me cook with her. And that was kind of like replaced maybe having play dates and things like that. I would just sit and watch her cook in the kitchen and participate wherever I could. And she was really, really great about that. So just a little tidbit from my mom.
So amazing. Well, and the
But
consistency of being able to have those home cooked meals and being with your family, during those
yeah,
times of day and stuff, I think is so,
yeah.
so special, and unique to your situation. Like not a lot of kids can say that about their parents,
Mhm.
especially, working busy European parents, being
Yeah.
able to also provide that for kids, I
And we
think is
had
so
dinners
special.
together every single night. And I remember at the American school, some kids would just like go in the fridge and grab what they wanted when they wanted. And there was no meal time at the end of the day. And that really surprised me because I just assumed everybody had dinner together in their families at a dining table at night, no matter what. Like that was one thing that did not change. Dinner time, family time, half an hour of we're eating and sitting and we're together. My parents still do that every single day, breakfast, lunch, and dinner every day. So
So amazing.
yeah,
Yeah.
that is pretty
Well,
cool.
especially in like our like environment now with the phones and like everything coming at us so quickly, to be able to just like stop time for a second and sit down and enjoy a meal together, I think is really a skill set now that a lot of people haven't developed. And it takes time
Yes.
to develop that, like,
And discipline. Yeah.
presence with whoever you're with. Yeah, it really is discipline. Like it sounds like luxury, but it takes discipline to be able to, dedicate that time to the people you're with and really enjoying your food and being there.
100%.
I love it. Well, let's jump back to, so you went to Canadian boarding school, you joined your brother over there. Were your parents still in California at the time?
Yes. So my parents were in California. They've been in California the whole time. My brother went to a boarding school in Ontario outside of Toronto because that's where my dad spent his teenage years. And then I went to high school on Vancouver Island.
Awesome. Was it like a mixed boarding school or all girls? And
Nope.
then what were your academics like?
Yeah, it was 70% boys at the time, 30% girls. It used to be an all boys school. It's actually a school that's known for being a rugby school, like a rugby recruiting school. So they're really focused on that as a sport, rugby and rowing. They're always number one in those two sports in the country. But they're also known for having, and my school was called Shawnigan Lake School, by the way, on Vancouver Island. And Shawnigan is known for having a merit based acceptance system. So it's not like other boarding schools where you might have a parent that donates X amount of money and it guarantees that student entrance into the school. So they did a very good job as best they could of leveling the playing field for all different types of backgrounds and all different types of kids. And I think that contributed to the really wonderful experience for everybody. And yeah, I think that's why I ended up there because it was just a better fit for me. And I really truly I have very fond memories of that school and that place. And I still have some lifelong friends that I made over there. So that was my boarding school experience. Academics were very tough, but the environment was supportive. So for the most part, you have your odd teacher here and there that, I mean, you can't like them all. But for the most part, the academics were rigorous, way harder than anything I ever experienced in college by far. And I think left us generally pretty well prepared for the outside world. So it's all good. That experience is really positive.
Love that. Well, and it's also an interesting take because I think that, my husband went to boarding school and it was not his idea to go. And initially it was, he's explained to me that he was angry with his parents for a
Yeah.
period of time. And then he embraced it and really had a great experience there. But in the beginning, it was a hard transition to go to boarding school and be so
Mhm.
abruptly away from your parents. But when I look at his success and some of his defining qualities, I really believe that him going to boarding school created a lot of the independence, the ability to just like make decisions and be proactive and be self-sufficient. I think a lot of that came from that early experience at boarding school. When you were sent to boarding school, were you like all in and
I could
excited
not
to
wait.
go?
I literally could not wait. And I think I might have one of the only experiences of I did not feel homesickness at all. Like I'm talking, I like didn't even feel 1 minute of missing home. I just didn't. I don't
You're
know
like,
if
I'm
that's
good.
I don't I was so ready. I often get described, and my sisters use this word with me a lot, but they often said I was a precocious child. But I really felt like, even though I look back on it now and honestly I wasn't an adult, I felt very much like I went from a preteen to an adult very quickly. And I think that would have happened regardless of going to boarding school. I don't know if it was a combination of being the youngest of all of my siblings and having a lot of older siblings around, not having many children in my life and having mostly adults, older adults, and my grandmother around me. But I just felt like ready to leave the home. Like I was ready. And I also am grateful for that experience because by the time I got to college, I didn't deal with any of those emotions. I was fine. Like I didn't deal with missing family or missing home or not having the comforts of home, dealing with like, different sleeping environments with lots of people around in dorms like situations, a lack of privacy, for example, I got used to really fast. I definitely appreciate that so much more in my adult life now because sharing a personal space with other kids for 4 years is tough. um, but it was overall, I think, the experience I needed. And I did personally very well in that environment.
It's great.
Yeah.
So you mentioned you went to college. What was the like college application and selection process like, and where did you end up going?
So funny. So I applied to FIT, the Fashion Institute of Technology. I had been wanting to go there since I was 11 years old. I toured the school when I was 11 with my mom, and I wanted to be a fashion designer. I applied, but the college counselor that I had at my boarding school forgot to submit an American equivalent transcript. There was some issue with me applying to an American school from a Canadian school. The grades didn't line up. They had to do some conversion or whatever. That didn't happen. And my application got withdrawn and they couldn't make a decision. And so I was left. I was one of the only kids after graduating. I had nowhere to go. So I haven't told you this yet, but I ended up reapplying for the winter term. So it would have been a January start. So now I had nothing to do from May 2010 until January 2011. I ended up going to work in Europe. So I was a gap student at a boarding school for girls in England for about 3 months. Became a language assistant for the French department very quickly. And then I had a pretty negative experience there because I was 17 when I graduated. I'm young for my grade. And they wouldn't let me leave the campus on weekends, even as a quasi employee. So it was this really weird environment. I was like, I've got to get out of here. So my dad helped me get in touch with we got in touch with my family in Germany. So I have an aunt who lives in Berlin with my two cousins. And she had a neighbor in her building who was looking for an au pair. And I said, say no more. I will be there in a week. And I packed up my bags in England. I was in West Sussex and I flew to Germany. I landed in Berlin and I worked as an au pair for the remainder of my time until I started college in January. I got accepted to FIT to start in the winter term. So I worked as an au pair and went to a German language school in Germany, in Berlin. And I actually met my best friend there who's also French. And now she lives in France. We've stayed in touch all those years. So it was the greatest kind of, I don't know, on the fly decision I made. Had a wonderful time and then moved to New York right before my 18th birthday, started at FIT, and I got a job as a nanny and as a sales girl at Bloomingdale's. I worked those two jobs for the first year of college and then quit my nanny job and worked full-time for Bloomingdale's. And that kind of started my career in fashion.
That's so interesting. I think that, they say like everything happens for a reason. Like you must have been like devastated when that, you found out about that issue
Gosh.
with your application and everything, like, oh my gosh, like
I
I'm
was
behind now. I'm the
humiliating.
only one.
Yeah.
Yes. But then to be able to have that experience, I mean, obviously the au pair situation sounds like it was the better part of that stage, but also to kind of have this very adult experience of like having one situation, having to realize, process within yourself, like, okay, wait, this isn't working for me. Was it in England that you were
Yes.
at the school that like wouldn't let you leave? And
Yeah.
then having to like have the wherewithal to say, like, I'm going to change my situation. Like, I got to get out of here and change something up so I can feel happy and good and enjoy myself. And doing that and having the experience, like, okay, I changed something about my life that wasn't working. And look at this amazing situation that I got myself into. I,
Mhm.
had this experience of being an au pair, formed a lifelong friendship, and then also being able to carry over. And once you move to New York, having, an immediate job while you're in school is
Yeah.
so cool. It's like that gave you the skills to have a nanny job while you started, and then you got into Bloomingdale's. It's like
Yeah.
it does really seem like everything's intentional, but in the moment, you're probably just like, "What is this setback? Like, not what I wanted."
Completely. And one of the things I forgot to mention is that when I was 13, I started a job at Woodlands Market in California. I worked all through middle school too and high school as a grocery bagger because that was one of the only jobs I could have at that age. So it's funny when I graduated high school, or by the
Yeah.
time I got to FIT, I had like 4.5 years of work experience on my resume, like full work
Full resume.
experience. Yeah. In retail, cash register management, all that stuff, nannying, looking after kids. And so I definitely had quite the head start by the time I got to New York, which I'm grateful for because I needed a job stat. And I got one within 2 weeks of landing. That was pretty exciting. So, anyways.
Oh, girl.
Yeah.
Well, okay, so you worked in fashion. You worked at Bloomingdale's while going to
Yep.
FIT. This is
Yep.
all like a very fashion-based track.
Yep.
And from creeping your LinkedIn, I know that you definitely progressed in fashion before you moved on to working in other areas and obviously
Yeah.
starting the company you run now. Tell us a little bit about that experience and why you
Yeah.
eventually like shifted away from fashion.
Totally. And I can probably do this in just to give the whole trajectory. But basically, I worked in retail. I worked in sales. I got hired to be a sales girl for a French company called Comptoir des Couturiers, which is basically like the J. Crew of France. They had many stores. They were expanding in the US and they started to open stores inside of big department stores. And when I started working for Comptoir, I got my first taste of working in sales, true pure sales, because I was on a draw versus commission sales structure. And I quickly became, I don't know if addicted's the right word, but I was so amazed that I could make as much money as I wanted. Like the more I sell, the more I earn. And that was such a departure from my minimum wage hourly job in the grocery stores I had worked, where you have to work more hours in order to get paid more and it's minimal. So I kind of fell in love with sales and customer service more than anything. I loved talking to people. And I realized very quickly that I was making a lot of money on commission sales with people that I really liked. I started to draw this connection between, okay, the better interactions and relationships I foster with people, the more successful I'm going to be in whatever I'm doing. And that started to happen very quickly for me. And I stayed in retail for a long time because a lot of the corporate jobs, everybody wants to move from a retail job where you're standing in stores all day long and it's kind of viewed as this like bottom of the totem pole job, and move into a corporate internship and get a desk job and work in an office in New York City. And I couldn't find any job that would pay me enough for me to be able to afford school and classes and pay for rent in New York City. So I stayed in retail for a long time. And I got recruited. So I moved up in Bloomingdale's. Then I worked for a company called Faire. And then eventually, my last job at Bloomingdale's, I was selling handbags and small leather goods at Chanel at their flagship store inside of Bloomingdale's on Lexington Avenue. From there, I got recruited by a company called 24/7, which is a fashion recruitment firm in the US. They placed me at Thomas Meyer. And Thomas Meyer was the creative director for Bottega Veneta at the time. He had been the creative director for Bottega for almost 30 years, and he started an eponymous brand under the Kering umbrella. And that went very quickly from being the assistant manager of the West Village store to within a couple of months, I was managing the Madison Avenue store, the West Village store, overseeing the Hampton store. And so it was just kind of running retail in New York for that company. That company that placed me at that job, that recruiting firm, recruited me to become the retail recruiter within that company to place the types of jobs that I had been working. So I ran the retail desk as a junior recruiter, and that was my first job into corporate. And that was my first experience ever in corporate America. And so I was a junior recruiter and like basically an intern. I mean, I think it was 23 when I started, 22 maybe. And I really liked recruiting. It was sales and I was good at it, but I was making so much money for other people. And it was hard for me to get out of that mindset. And I just kind of struggled with that, being worked to the bone. There was still very much this hazing culture inside the company. And I ended up moving to a different recruiting firm, hoping that that would improve things because it was a company that was focused on commercial real estate and it was a little bit more serious and the jobs were a little bit more lucrative. But at the end of the day, I knew after spending 3 years in a corporate job that that wasn't for me. No matter how good of a recruiter I was, I knew I wanted to go the entrepreneurial route and start my own thing. Like I knew it wasn't right in my heart and I wasn't going to want to work for someone else necessarily for the rest of my life. And I felt ready to do it and ready to start my own company. And I had all the things in place. I was going to start my own recruitment firm, had the name picked out, everything done. And then I got a call from my dad about this opportunity. And that's how we ended up joining forces to start First Growth Brands.
I think this is so fascinating. I mean, I had a similar experience I worked in finance in like my first really big, and when I took that role, I was like, oh, I want a serious, like, I want a big girl job because I had been modeling before that. And I was like, I want to wear a suit. I want to like go in there and see. And I like, there were elements that I loved of that. But I think I felt when you said you're like, I was really just making money for other people. It's like, you learn so many skills there, but I remember kind of feeling like, here I am, like helping people manage these like giant wealth portfolios and pouring everything I have into analysis of their investments and their life plans and everything. And I'm like, and I go home so bone tired that I can't even look at my own little portfolio of mutual funds. I have no idea what's going on with my own wealth planning.
Yeah.
And I was just like, I want to be all these people that I'm managing money for are entrepreneurs and people that are like doing bold, big things in the world and diversifying their own portfolios. I'm like, I want to be on that end of things, not this one. And, kind of having that like aha moment. But then it's also like you look at those experiences and there's so much that you still take from them into your entrepreneurial journey. To have the skill set of being able to run sales of people, which is really like recruiting, managing people, getting the right people in the right roles. From almost every entrepreneur I've ever met, they say that the hardest part of running your own company is hiring and firing people, managing the right people in the right roles, keeping them happy, keeping them motivated. That it's like you might be selling a product or other service business, but really as an entrepreneur and as a president of a company, you're managing the people in your company. Do you feel like that's one of the core skills that you brought to the table as an entrepreneur?
100%. And also with a background in recruiting, it helped me. So I used to have a much larger team and the company's gone through a number of different changes and phases. And so, I was actually responsible for hiring most of the people that have come into First Growth Brands over the years. I had my first experience with letting people go when I was at Tom Smyer. It's the worst feeling ever, and it does not get easier. Even if you have every reason in the world and you don't even necessarily like the person, it is by far the hardest thing. It's just there's no easy or nice way to do that. And I think you just have to stay very factual and remind yourself like you've made this decision, you commit to it. But the hiring process is great too. And I think people are what make the business run. I would say what keeps me up at night definitely is, yes, whether they're happy. There's times in when you're running your own business where can you make the next payroll? Like that happens all the time in startups, right? And then you start to think about, well, okay, this person has a family and 3 mouths to feed. Like that's the stuff that really keeps me up at night. But then also not letting that get in the way of you making sure you have the right person for the right role on board, and making sure that your emotions don't cloud your judgment and your decision making on who you should have or not have in the company for this particular stage of growth, or because it's just not the right fit. So for me, I've always been, I think, a pretty empathetic person that I don't like to disappoint people. I want people to feel happy. The hardest part for me is making a decision when I realize like maybe someone isn't right for the role and knowing that I'm going to have to make a change. That's the hardest skill. I think even more than actually having the conversation with someone about letting someone go or whatever it is, it's like, okay, you have to acknowledge it's not working. And that first step can be hard to get to after lots and lots of denial and trying to make things work, for example. So I'd say I learned that skill set in retail.
Totally.
It took me a little while, but had it before I started my own business.
Which is rare. A lot of people have to build that on the go as they are starting their own business. And it's just as hard, if not harder, than the day-to-day operations of the business itself, or refining the product and the price and all the things you have to do as an entrepreneur. So you mentioned that your dad called you with this opportunity, and eventually, obviously, your brother started working in this opportunity too. Tell us about the launch of your company.
It's kind of an unusual story. So I would say I'm more the adopted mother of this brand than the birth mom of this brand. That's kind of the way that I put it. So my dad's a serial entrepreneur. He's been doing entrepreneurial things for the last 40 years. Really, we took over an existing importer that was struggling and was going to shut down. And this wine importer, was just importing. They were importing products from Europe and selling them to a wholesaler in the US. And they were looking for a buyer, and we had no interest in the business because it was a bad business model that wasn't making any money. But they convinced us to have some conversations with these really incredible groups of grape growers and farmers in Europe that they had planned to make some private labels with. And so that kind of piqued our interest, because one thing that my dad had some previous experience with was brand building brands for the US market. And so having the French background that we have, we think we're connoisseurs of all things French and French wine, but we were thrown for a bit of a loop when we went to southern France in this growers cooperative, southwestern France in Limoux, as we said in the beginning, which couldn't be further away from the Champagne region in France. Could not be further away. So we were like, what are we doing here? Everyone says that there's this amazing sparkling wine that's coming out of this region, but we're thinking like nothing's as good as champagne. Like, how good could this possibly be? And when we met with these families and the facilities down there, we were really astonished when we tasted the sparkling wine, because it tasted better than most ultra expensive champagnes that we could find here in the US. And they were already producing a little bit of this brand called Fête, which was a Crémant de Limoux. And we were like, well, why is nobody paying attention to that? That's a standout product. And what are the hurdles? Like, why can't we get this in the US? Why don't we see it on grocery store shelves? Why don't people know about this? And in that process, we discovered and were really schooled, frankly, by the local community, because we were told, and it was shown to us, the cellar records from 1531, that champagne making was invented in this region, not Champagne. They started the process. Champagne, as we know it today, comes from this region of France, and we didn't know that. A French family with a grandmother who was from the Champagne province did not know that champagne making was invented in this part of France. And that was just kind of, an outrageous story for us to learn. And then things really became interesting as we got to know this area and these people, that we could bring this to the market at a very accessible price point. And then through tasting so many, iterations of the product, realizing that it was truly a less sweet style. And we, looked into that a little bit more. And sure enough, it's really like one of the driest or less sweet options available in the entire US market for sparkling wine. We're significantly less sweet than Prosecco, definitely less sweet than Veuve Clicquot and a few of the other big names you might know. So just a lot less sugar. And so we started to look into the viability of it. And sure enough, we saw this wide open lane between cheaply produced, mass-produced sweet Prosecco and super expensive French champagne. Like, where's the middle ground here? Why can't we have super high-quality French bubbles on a Tuesday night? Oh, because all we have available is cheap Prosecco. Like, let's fix that problem and bring something to the market that people can afford for daily celebration and enjoy true French authentic quality. And what's more authentic than the birthplace of sparkling wine? I mean, it truly can't go back any further in time. So that's how that was born. And we took over the company and basically saved it from going down and totally rebranded. And we're like, we're not going into the importing model. We're going to focus on FETE. We're going to bring this brand to the US market and just do our best to make this the gold standard of everyday French bubbles. And that's what we did. And we've been doing that for the past almost 6 years now. So it's been a minute.
I love it. Well, I think that just being able to look at the marketplace and see like someone that might, not really deeply understand the marketplace for French bubbles might not have seen like, okay, like actually there's a group of people that want a less sweet, more affordable option. Like, where is that?
Yeah.
And taking a struggling business. And I think that a lot of people that pursue entrepreneurship think that they have to start something from scratch. Like, I got to start a product, I got to create it, get a patent, and do all the things. So many successful entrepreneurs are that way because they saw a failing product or a failing business, and they were able to swoop in, fix it up, and redirect it into a more successful lane. And I think that that's not always talked about, that pathway for entrepreneurship, getting gritty and taking something and just refining it or thinking of it a little bit differently.
Yeah.
I love it. Well, I cannot wait to try some.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I can't believe you haven't already. We should have had
I know.
We'll do it next time.
Well, it's funny because I'm exactly your customer because I love, I know maybe we'll do a little tasting or we can put it in our social media or something, but I love champagne, but I don't love anything too sweet, especially as we get older, we're talking about like back pain and stuff. I'm like, the hangover, especially as a parent with kids that wake up before 6 o'clock is not nice. So I'm like, a nice high quality, not too sweet champagne, sign me up.
Yeah.
You're so easy to talk to, and this is so much fun. I feel like your path is so fascinating. And I think that, I'm just thinking about when you were talking about that struggle from when you're, that 9 to 12 time when you're trying to figure out like, wait, I have this weird different background of speaking French all day and being in a French school, and this is so uncomfortable, and, the back pain and everything. And then kind of seeing where you are now is a dynamic role that probably heavily leans into that experience of your French, upbringing and your French speaking and that difference. I love to highlight stories where it's like the thing that made you different and probably uncomfortable during those preteen years, when leaned into is really like often that little special boost of what is going to make you really incredibly successful later. And I think you're such a beautiful example of that truth. We usually round out our interviews with a little like fast 5 questions, where you can answer whatever comes to mind first. We always answer end with the same closing question. So if you're okay with that, we'll jump right into the fast 5. For number 1, do you have a morning routine? And if so, what is it?
Oh my gosh, yes. I'm so embarrassed. I'm a psycho morning person. I wake up at 4 o'clock every single day. And I am in the gym with a trainer 3 days a week from 5 to 6. And the other 2 days I'm doing my own workout routine. So I'm a gym rat. And that is every single day consistently 4 a.m. Yeah, that's my morning routine. That's it. That's the one thing I don't compromise on and I don't sacrifice.
I love it.
Mhm.
Kishia and I are both really physical people too. And like it's something I've learned as I get older. I'm like, okay, if I don't get my workout in,
Yeah.
everything else falls apart. Like the ship
Yep.
crashes. So I'm
And
like, this is one thing I got to commit to. And
yeah, with European hours starting
totally.
at like 6 or 7, I have to get all of that out of the way first, or it will not happen later in the day. So that's why 4.
Okay. I was wondering, I was like, damn, 4 is early. But like, yeah, that makes total sense with the business you're in. Number 2, what is your favorite part of winemaking?
Oh my gosh, specifically with sparkling, tasting the base wines before they go into the blend. It's a unique thing you'll never get to try unless you're specifically in the sparkling wine business. But tasting that like first fresh pressing of Pinot Noir or whatever it is before it gets turned into sparkling wine, it's like out of this world delicious. It's definitely the blend. That's the best part.
Number 3, tell us about an essential employee to your business right now.
Samantha Altamare. Not even a question. She's been around since the beginning. She actually was from the previous company and stayed on board when we came on. She's our head of operations. She is like a back of house superwoman. She actually has 2 small kids as well. I'm just completely in awe of how she gets it all done. It's truly, I think there's organization can be learned or can be an innate talent. And it's an innate talent for her. She is incredibly organized. She's also super pleasant to work with, and she is also my closest friend. So yeah, Samantha,
Love it.
integral.
Shout out Samantha.
Shout out to Samantha.
Number 4, describe your brand with adjectives.
Fun, cheerful, the anti-snob, better for you, green. Yeah, joyful though. I think joyful is number 1.
I love that.
Yeah.
Number 5, when I'm sure everybody is, who is of age, is just dying at this point to try some and go buy some. Where can people buy your product, order your product? Where can they get it?
Absolutely. So in California, we're in most grocery stores. So Ralph's, Vaughn's, Pavilions. We're in a few Total Wine and More in Southern California. You can always use our store locator on our website. And then we also sell through wine.com and we sell online directly. So if you really want it, there's a million ways to get it. But you can also just reach out to us on our website. We'll help you find one.
I love it.
Yeah.
Well, you should go to their website too, because the branding is just like, it's different, especially in this like very kind of like traditional champagne vibe space. That's can be a little bit stiff and old school. Their branding is very fresh and fun and different. So go check out their website. We will link it in the show notes. And finally, our final question is always, what was one quality that you had as a child or young woman that maybe you didn't appreciate then, but looking back on, you're so proud of now?
I always got in trouble for this, especially in the classroom, but I was never afraid to speak up. I was always the first one to kind of push back on the teacher and ask why. That's not good enough. You can't say because I said so. And I think that curiosity and that kind of loudness about me that I got punished for a lot or reprimanded for a lot has served me really, really well in this industry.
I love that answer. And it's such a strength and such a wisdom for young women to take away. So thank you so much, Charlotte. This has been a total treat. I'm on my way to go get a bottle of Fête.
Thank you.
And I will talk to you soon.
Okay, thanks, Asha. Talk to you soon.